for today's Ask Me Anything webinar focused on full stack engineering. I am the founder of Recruiting Innovation, which is an online learning platform for today's tech recruiter. We are focused on providing that resource to technical candidates and the lessons and education around what technical people do, so that you can be more effective and more efficient in recruiting for your candidates, because you know a little bit more what you are looking for. So I'm excited to introduce everyone today to Kyle Cobra Lee. Kyle is someone I've known for a while. We run around in the same circles in Denver, Boulder area. Kyle is a education and business dork, as he self-describes. He's also a software developer with quite a lot of experience across the board of the stack and types of platforms. He is currently the Director of Faculty at Galvanized Code School. It's a sort of coding boot camp. He leads the education programming for the Denver location. He's been doing that for about 2.5 years. And he, on the other side of things, is also a really amazing musician, and he has a co-host of the podcast Sprint UX. If you're curious to learn a little bit about the UX world, check out Kyle at Sprint UX. Now, to kind of give you a little bit of introduction on where we're going today and how we're going to structure things. So we've got a bit of a structured agenda up front, and then the second half of the webinar is the Ask Me Anything section, where we will open it up to your questions, your things that you need to clarify. But to get up to that point, we're going to first make sure to lay the groundwork of a little bit of what these full stack engineers do, what they look for when they're looking at a new opportunity, and how to sort of differentiate between a junior level candidate and a senior level candidate, kind of in their experience, and also maybe what that reflects, how that reflects in their resumes. Now, I sent everyone kind of a last minute, 15 minutes before the bell email. If you haven't seen that, go pop into your email real quick, whatever email you registered for the event with. I sent out a journey map template and a persona template. So just kind of orient yourself to those two articles. We're going to kind of use them on 2 of the 3 sections in the first half of the webinar. And then once we open it up to Ask Me Anything, it's feel free to pop into the chat box within the Zoom. You should be able to see a chat option at the bottom window, the bottom menu, and let your questions come through that way. Happy to mediate that way. And yes, this is really for you and what you need to know about full stack engineers, whether you're recruiting for them, whether you are working with these types of hiring managers and you want to better understand how to connect with your hiring managers or clients that way, or if you're just plain curious about what it is that full stack engineers do. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of, change this up. We're going to go straight to the workflow of a full stack developer. Now, when I mentioned the journey map, I'm going to introduce what this tool is, and then I'm going to hand over the conversation to Kyle, and I'll pop the window open so you can see him. But just to kind of orient yourself to this document, a journey map of the SDLC. This is a tool that I've taken from my time as a UX researcher, and now I'm realizing I didn't give you the whole intro to how we got here. So I was a recruiter for 10 years, and then I pivoted into UX research, and I quickly realized the tools I was using as a UX researcher to get to know our end users, what their goals and motivations were, what that meant for the business. These tools would be amazing resources for recruiters, because it's typically the same kind of work. We're trying to find these people for our companies. We're trying to get a feel for the candidate's needs and goals and motivations, figure out how that matches to the open role that we have. And so I've developed what I call the UX for Recruitment Method, and it's 3 tools from UX applied to the recruiting process. And the first and foremost, most important tool, in my opinion, is the journey map idea. So the journey map is an idea between beginning and end of, in the UX world, your user's life cycle with your product, like when they open the app, what they do while they're in the app, and when they close the app. Those key stages in what they're doing, thinking, and feeling as they go through your product is really important to understand kind of the context of the end user. And so in our case, we want to get to know what it is that this full stack engineer does, or an example of their project. And so within the software development lifecycle, and Kyle and I will have a conversation about this, this is very linear, what you see in front of us. This is version 1, but we're going to, modify this as we grow and develop our tools and add in an agile scenario. We'll discuss that in a minute, but typically there's 5 stages between when an engineer gets the ticket for a new feature or a request for a bug fix to when they actually merge that new code into the live platform. And those 5 stages are research, design, build and code, test what they just built and coded, and then release it or merge it into production. So as you are listening to Kyle's story about a typical project as a full stack engineer, please use this as your kind of map of sorts. Let this orient you as you do your critical listening to his story and figure out, piece what you're hearing into this sort of map. And part of the process is you're going to identify areas that maybe he didn't touch on that you might think is interesting to follow up, at which case, yes, we can answer those questions in the AMA section. But this way, at least as you're getting this information, you have a way to sort of file it and organize it, start to get a visual and get an understanding of the story behind what full stack engineers do. So that's the introduction on this tool, and that's the side from my end. And then for now, I am going to stop sharing, hand it over to Kyle, the one and only Mr. Cobra Lee. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Ahoy hoy.
Whenever I have questions about full stack universe, Kyle is the person I go to. So thank you so much for taking your time to share with us today, Kyle. I know how busy you are, but I also know that you really care about recruiting, and not only do you look for jobs, but your friends look for jobs, and developers want good relationships with recruiters, but they get frustrated that recruiters don't know what they do. So we're working to change that, aren't we?
Accurate.
Actually, Kyle's the one that gave me my tagline, we're making tech recruiting suck less. So he gets what we do. He's behind it. Now, without further ado, Kyle, take us into the world of full stack development.
Sure. So let me start by talking about what I consider full stack to be.
Great.
Because you guys are probably familiar with front-end development and back-end development, but like so many things in life, I think full stack development is more than the sum of its parts. And so as a full stack developer, I do a lot of front-end work. So I ran the Ember.js meetup for about 3 years. I do a lot of Vue stuff now. Really anything in a browser, like I'm pretty handy with. But like the first thing that I did out of school was database development. And so anything having to do with storing data, structuring data, modeling data, that was kind of my first love in software. And I'm also a certified node developer, and so I do a lot of server stuff as well. But even beyond that, having a really holistic look at the things that you're building, I also tend to get involved in design, user experience. I've also done sales and marketing. I did that in a previous life, and now like having this whole view of the product, like I'm the guy that you want to send out in front of a client, or I'm the person that can do user research and then apply those learnings directly. So fewer handoffs. So a product that I'm working on right now, product is a pretty generous term for this, keep that in mind, but I frequently will have students who go like, hey, I want to put Stripe payments on my app, or I'm trying to get a Google Maps overlay. I want a chat system in my app. How do I do that? And you can put them to documentation, but the problem is that the documentation for all these different tools that you want to integrate into your apps are very wildly in quality, and a lot of the times they assume a lot, or they'll have incomplete examples or non-working examples, or otherwise just very confusing to follow. And so somebody who wants to do something as simple as, I want users to be able to upload a file, and then I store it, and then I get the URL and put it in a database. That goes across the stack. Amazon's documentation for doing that with S3 is terrible. And so you'll see people struggle for days with something where if they just saw a working example, we could probably get that time down to half a day, hours instead. And so I've been working on this tool called the Web App Kitchen Sink that is just working annotated examples of all these different integrations that you might do with a web app. And my thought process going into this is I always try to think in what we call like a thin vertical slice. What are all of the different pieces of a technology stack that you might need to implement one feature, rather than building out an entire database or an entire backend or an entire front end and then trying to integrate these things together. Full stack developer tends to think of these things as different sides of the same thing, and so you approach them all together. And so like one of the first things I do on pretty much any new project that I'm starting is I try to get like a brochure page up, and like there's a couple things that hits on. So if your brochure page like would need to have a front end, and so much the better if you're also storing like a little bit of data that you're showing there, and then you get all this stuff deployed, and we're always trying to do something valuable so that we're never pushing off the value to the end of the product or the end of the cycle. And so if I can get that brochure site up, that at least lets people know that like my product exists, or this feature is coming, or something like that. So, but the other thing from a technical standpoint that you get is that you have to set up your front end and structure your folders and choose some like basic technologies. Same thing with the back end, same thing with the database, and all these things need to be deployed. And so you've done something valuable, and in the process set up an awful lot of these kinds of peripheral things that when you're starting to build out a more technical feature, now you also don't need to worry about deployment or something like that. Because I think in a traditional SDLC kind of thing, we build all this stuff and then we deploy it all at the end, or we test it all at the end. And you can run into a lot of problems doing that, where you can work yourself into a corner and where you have something that is basically untestable or undeployable. Whereas if you're doing all of these things as you go along, you mitigate a lot of that risk. And so then as I'm developing out the actual features, I try to go to where like the product meets the customer first and then work backwards from there. So I'll build out any kinds of views, any kind of thing that would make the feature look real to a user. And a lot of times you can sort of stub that stuff out like quick and dirty really easy. And to a user it would look imperceptible, but they don't realize that all the data is hard-coded. It's not actually pulling out of a database. It's not dynamic. Doesn't work on mobile or something like that. And then you massage all of that stuff, and then that ends up making like your first benchmark. It's like, okay, this looks and feels right, and now all I need to do is make it real. And so you go one step back, maybe where your front end is impacting your back or communicating with your back end, and you go, okay, can I get all these dynamic pieces working through to here? And then you make this big jump to the back end, where you go, okay, now if I fake everything on like this initial part of the back end out, but I deliver that over a network, does it work now? And at that point, like your front end's in pretty good shape. And then you just keep working back through the back end, where it's like, okay, can I take this hard-coded data and can I put it into a database? Can I make the data dynamic now? And one of the things that's interesting about this process is that like the testing part of this, you want to do kind of continuously. Same thing with the release. Okay, cool. If I have this one button push release, can I push it up to a staging server or something like that? If I have the front end working, if it's faked out correctly, can I give this to like an actual user or a representative user and get their feedback now before I go to all of the work of making all this shit dynamic when maybe I didn't build the right feature to begin with? And the other thing that's kind of interesting about being a full stack developer when you're doing something like this is as you like work through the back end, certain things might become apparent that impact the front end. And you go, oh crap, I didn't think about that. I'm going to restructure my front end real quick and then like sort of do the abbreviated version of this process of extracting it from the front to the back. And not having to go through a department or just throw from one silo over to another really speeds up this process a lot and ends up making it feel like a lot more of an integrated single product rather than a thing that 3 different teams built. So that's generally kind of my mindset in building a product or a feature, is trying to do pretty much all of these steps all of the time, but always going from the part that impacts the user all the way to how do we make this scaled, efficient, whatever else.
All right. Well, can you, when we're thinking through that full process, so that's sort of the thinking is that you start with the user, you make your way back to the data pool.
Yes.
Can you maybe discuss with us what's the initial thought? So you're building this tool, for example. What in the research part where you're trying to decide what technology to use? How do you just assess the landscape at the beginning and decide these are the tools or the frameworks I should be using for this because X?
Oh, absolutely. So some of the things that you'll do up front is and I think this is also a relatively uniquely full stack thing, is you go, cool, has this problem been solved already? Has somebody just done this and maybe we can use that? And that's kind of like that buy, build, integrate kind of thing. Whereas if you're just a back-end developer, I feel like your inclination is a lot more all right, tell me what back-end I got to build. But since the entire conceit of this is that you're approaching the problem holistically, first thing to do is okay, cool, has somebody done this before? And the answer is usually yes, but. And so you're okay, cool. Why didn't they do the but? And it's if it's in the best case scenario, it's because well, that's not really their core user base, doesn't really value those things. In the worst case, it might be well, because it's really fucking hard. And you can usually do some digging to figure out how they approached this. You can sometimes look through their repos. You can ask around a little bit. You can use resources like Denver Devs, hey, would anybody have need for, or I have some people who could use this thing. Any of you guys go about building something like that before? And that might, in 2018, some of the things that usually come out of those conversations is whoa, yeah, actually, you don't really need a full server for that. You could use something like AWS Lambda and save yourself a lot of code. And you go, oh, holy crap, I'd like to try that. But I think one of the things that non-technical folks get caught up on sometimes is how would you pick Angular versus React versus Vue versus Ember or something like that? And that's almost a non-issue. A lot of that just falls into what are you fast at? And I'm really fast at Ember and Vue. And the reason I like having both of those tools in my toolbox is that Ember is very comprehensive and Vue is very not. And so you can work in very small modular pieces with Vue, but Ember is kind of this whole enchilada, all or nothing approach. And so I have both of those, but you can honestly solve any of these problems with any of them, and probably the limiting factor is going to be what are you solid with, or what is your team solid with? But on a lot of the stuff that really are technical decisions you need to make between a lot of things that maybe don't have quite as much overlap. Those kinds of things I'll oftentimes just get out of conversations with other developers, and you go, hey, what's cool? Or what's proven and reliable? Or who has solved something like this with one of these tools that I can just kind of rip off the whole thing and just tweak the pieces that I need to if it's open source or something.
Yeah, I like how there's a huge community element in there.
Oh, definitely.
And what about, so you touched on this a little bit, and this is where the journey map is very linear and not very agile.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what you mean by kind of continuously testing, continuously deploying? How that, there should be 2 arrows that make circles between the build and test, at least as a minimum.
Sure. So software project management methodologies are on a spectrum from like super predictive to super agile. On the predictive end, you end up with TPM, or traditional project management. It's pejoratively called waterfall, but it's essentially what SDLC is like specifically aligned with. Is like we do all of our research, and then we do all of our design, and then we do all of our building, and then we do all of our testing, and then we do all of our release stuff. And like that's the way that project management has traditionally gone. And the problem with it is that every single project throughout time, you start building it and you realize, oh, a new feature came up, or oh, there's a design issue, or while you're testing, you find out some critical assumption that you made that didn't turn out to be true, so you need to go back. But since the whole thing is designed to be done in these discrete phases, it gets very hard to swim back up the waterfall. So in the middle of the spectrum, you get these more like kind of iterative approaches. I call them mini waterfalls, where it's still like research, design, build, test, release. You just do it more than once, and like you take things that you learn from the process and apply them to the process the next time. True agility is actually a lot more chaotic than that. All of those tasks, research, design, build, test, release, are all happening all the time. So you might write your tests first and say, okay, I know that I'm done when these tests pass. And you can even, like to some extent, get user feedback on that, or at least stakeholder feedback. It's like, hey, if I could give you software that does these things, are we in good shape? Your releasing you want to do as early and as often as possible. If you have a valuable feature, don't sit on it. Or even if you're not necessarily releasing it to the public, you might get it up on a staging server so that your customer or your stakeholder or something can see this like in a matter of hours or days, rather than when you're all done releasing, and then they kind of have that head scratch. It's like, is this what we were talking about? And one of the other things that's really cool about that agile approach is that a customer or user or something can tell you exactly what they want, and you can spec that out perfectly, and you can come up with a killer design for it. Then as soon as the user actually sees it, they go, well, you know what? Now that I'm using it, I actually don't like this very much. And in Agile, that's like a thing that you can accommodate. And in fact, if you're doing something like faking out that front end and you're giving that to a user and getting their feedback, you saved yourself all of the effort of like building out this thing that nobody wants. And like that's like probably like one of the core parts of my aversion to predictive project management is customer asks for something, you give it to them, they don't really like it, but at least like it was obnoxious to go through that process the whole time. It's like nobody's happy, nobody got like a thing that they wanted, but at least you stuck to the plan. That's kind of the spirit of that. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll do a full Agile webinar next time. Talk a little bit more about that and Scrum and all that jazz. I know there's different parts that go to make a whole.
Cool.
Great. Well, that's our first section is through the kind of the project journey. Have any questions, say those up for our AMA. We're going to make sure to have a good 20 minutes left on that. Next up, we are going to do the kind of, let me pull it up here. Oh, I'm a little bit slow on the uptick. Let's see, can you see? Hold on. Weird. Okay. So then this, so now we're going to be talking about how full-stack engineers and developers evaluate new opportunities. So this is really important as recruiters because multiple ways. You want to have messages that connect with them and get them to respond to you. You also want to be able to position the opportunity in the ways that they're interested in hearing about it so you can get them engaged. And then also with the red flags, these are things you can be aware of when you're working with your hiring managers or your clients. If they are all about X or Y or Z within the red flags, you can kind of help coach them and consult the direction away from the red flags to the green flag. So benefits of not only as a recruiter, but also when working with your hiring team. So Kyle, what do you, when you're as a full stack developer and you're looking at opportunities or your friends are, what are some things that get you really excited? That really is like, these are full stack type people, they get it. I'm going to have a good time.
Sure. So The first thing that I look for, since full stack, like by its nature, has this really holistic approach to the product, more so than a lot of other kinds of developers, what I'm building matters a lot to me. And like that gets probably less true the further back in the stack. Like system admins, most of the system admins I know are not particularly married to like the product that they're making. A lot of back-end developers, not all of them, sorry Brooks, but I know that a lot of back-end developers don't super care either. Like the problem that you're solving, like the math problem of it is the part that's engaging. But like that's very much not the case for me. I care about the vision, I care about the customers we're serving, and like how well our products are solving the problem. So that's thing number one for me. Next thing that I'll look for is a modern tool set. So if I see a bunch of stuff in the ad that's like SOAP services and .NET and Cold Fusion and like a lot of that sort of stuff, like even Angular 1X kinds of things at this point, that's a pretty massive turnoff for me. Because if your culture was moving quickly enough that like I think you could really embrace full stack development, your tool chain probably would have kept up. Now, like there are some small exceptions to that. Because like things like Java can go either way. There's like plenty of newer shops that use Java and like plenty of dinosaurs that like I'd never want to work with that do also. Another one that's kind of in that category is PHP. I've been doing this long enough that like PHP was one of my first loves in programming, and like that was kind of in its heyday. And honestly, I still kind of have some affinity for it. But I have a lot of buddies that will see PHP on a job posting and be like, nope, hard pass. But if I see a couple newer things on a tech stack, I go, okay, cool. They kind of got their ears to the ground. Might be experimenting with stuff, but like they're not just sticking with older tool sets. Because the more modern tool sets, I think, really do a good job of enabling this sort of cross-collaborative full stack development thing. Another thing that I'll look for in a place I want to work is like how personable does the company kind of come off in the posting. So there's a pretty wide range from like candidates shall have 3 to 5 years of experience in XYZ technologies, and it's just this big laundry list of bullshit that they clearly like just sort of scraped out of like, hey, can you list every technology we've ever used? Awesome. I'm throwing them all in the job posting. And like that's a pretty big turnoff for me. If I can get a sense of who you are, what your culture is, and what it might be like to work on your team from the posting itself, that goes a long way. And a lot of that is just like copywriting and tone and stuff. But it's pretty easy to smell when a recruiter, I don't know, tried to like sex up a dev manager's like what they actually asked for, and all that stuff just smells like bad culture to me. And I'd say the last thing, specifically as a full stack guy, that I look for in job postings are like no smell of silos. So when I hear like front end team, back end team, DevOps team, like that kind of sets off my red flags a little bit. I'd rather like you are working on this feature, you're on this features team, or you're on the dev team or something like that. And like even in like giant companies, you can do this. Like Google will have, you know, search or Gmail or even like smaller subsets of those things, but like their devs get to approach all of the problems related to those products holistically. If I take a front end job and I feel like the silo walls are really high, then I worry that if I'm going to get closed off from the back end, that I'm not really going to have a voice in how that part of it goes. Because especially like the distinction between the front end and the back end is getting like increasingly arbitrary. And so you end up with these turf wars over who is going to solve which problem, and like whether or not it is the appropriate solution for the user ends up being the last consideration there. It's like, well, your team has more people, so you handle like this ORM stuff. So all of those are like some things that I kind of keep an eye out for.
Really good. Awesome. Next up, we are going to pull out our persona templates, and if you didn't see that, then I sent it to you in the email. Let's see. Sometimes this, whoops. And yeah, human moment here as I click on the wrong button. And anyway, so we're going to go to the persona. So Kyle, if you would be so kind as to kind of, I know I shared this form with you as well. Here we go. These are, this is a persona template. And so for those of you that are new to the UX for Recruitment Method, a persona is kind of the archetype of a group of similar people. So in the user experience world, for example, I work in an athletic app. We had a persona of a very competitive person that was data-driven, and then we also had a persona for the more social runner that was just there to connect with people. And so these are two very different personas that are experiencing the same like athletic event, but you build differently for them. And so the idea with personas within the recruitment process is there's personas for the full-stack engineer versus a DevOps engineer. Obviously, there's blending. It's a spectrum. But when you kind of aggregate information about a type of professional and you group it within the sort of goals, tasks, deliverables world, combining with their experience and their motivations and frustrations, you'll start to see, as you use this tool, similarities as you speak to more full-stack engineers compared to, let's say, DBAs. DBAs might get frustrated by different things than a full-stack engineer or be motivated by different things. And so, you know, within your own career development as a recruiter, if you have your junior experience and motivations were a little bit different than where you are as a senior recruiter and what frustrates you as well. So in this context, let's kind of start with talk about where front-end engineers start and kind of what that persona looks like, and then as they get experience and skills, what does then a senior persona for a full stack engineer look like?
Sure. So I think once upon a time, full stack development, especially like before that word started getting used, like that was the culmination of like your career. Is that you just seen so many different parts of software development, then you started, you know, kind of billing yourself as a full stack developer. I don't think that has to be the case anymore. So like the concept behind the school that I run is like we take people from 0 to 60 as full stack developers the whole way. And so I do think that you can be born that way. And I think there's actually a lot of advantages to coming up, seeing all sides of this development rather than like doing some narrow specialization. And I think that a lot of that, like, especially the people who start as full stack developers, but full stackers in general, I think of as just hustlers. And they've probably been that way in a lot of other different aspects of their life also. These are just get it done people, and people who aren't satisfied solving part of a problem. They kind of just want to get their hands dirty and be a part of all of it. And so, I mean, that's certainly how I got into this. When I was, whether I was playing in bands or I was in sales or marketing, I'd be like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we had a tool that did X, Y, Z thing? And then I'd want to just build it. And so, like, that's kind of the motivations that you have coming into this. And then as far as like your career development, most people sort of pick a stack. Once upon a time, the mean stack, that was the meal ticket for getting a job. Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. And like that's not really the case in 2018 anymore. There's still plenty of mean stack developers out there. But like that's the entire like landscape of especially web-based software development now has just exploded. And so at this point, it doesn't really matter that much. It can be React and GraphQL and Python and it doesn't actually matter that much. Mostly you just kind of pick one and you build some apps with that. And then what we'll encourage our students to do is like, okay, so you build a couple apps and like some technologies you're familiar with. Now do it in some that you're not. And so that might be a different front-end framework. Like if you know React, now give Angular a shot. Or it might be, cool, you've built a server in Node and Express, now try doing it in Python and Flask. And like the spirit of the full stacker is not, oh no, I can't do that. This is my narrow thing that I do. I'm an Express developer. Like these narrow niches are really kind of antithetical to what we do. And so they'll do something with Python and Flask, and they'll go, actually, this is a lot like the one we did with Node and Express. Cool, now do it with Ruby and Rails. And they'll realize that like all these technologies have a lot more in common than they do different. And then they start noticing patterns between them and like how those patterns apply all over the technology stack. And like the idea of like constantly learning and exploring and this kind of like open world of technology thing, I think that's also very much a part of who full stack people are. And the opposite of that would be something like, nope, I have my Java skill set, I am a Java developer, and I will keep pace with Java as best I can, but I get angry when somebody asks me to work outside of my box. Whereas like a full stacker gets excited by like, oh shit, I don't know that technology. Can't wait to learn it. Yep, you're on mute, Allison.
Another human moment. Yes. Okay. So you have your students that are coming out of the program. And we just want to keep this the next 2 minutes so we can open up the AMA and start getting your questions into the chat, everybody, if you'd like. So, if you're looking at your students that are coming out of the program, what kind of role would you say they would be interested in, or what would be a good fit? As a recruiter, and I'm considering a junior full stack engineer, what can I have confidence that they're going to be able to do right when they start with us?
Sure. So a junior full stacker, like if they can do it, then like the big thing that they're able to do is like deliver immediately. They tend to be able to do it with relatively little direction, especially compared to computer science graduates or like more niche sorts of people. They're used to like just taking a need and delivering a solution. The things you need to watch for is that like they might not do it the most efficient way, or they might get stuck on somewhere that a specialist wouldn't. But the things that they can do, like hit the ground running, are you give them a problem and they deliver you a solution.
Great. And what's different about what you're looking for, or what you deliver as more of a full stack architect? What would you what's different about your motivations, your goals within that work?
Sure. So I think that a lot of like junior full stackers sometimes are just full stackers because they haven't picked a specialization yet, and that's okay. When you see like a more like senior architect or like a senior or principal full stacker, then like at that point it's your career choice. Like I'm not waiting to find the technology I'm going to fall in love with. Like the thing that I'm looking for is to sort of work with all of it. And another thing that ends up being kind of different there is like having seen some fads come and go, and being more in tune with like the history of these, which can inform some of those technical decisions. So like a big one for me right now that I'm still really on the fence about is Typescript. Typescript is kind of a neat idea. However, I feel like we just went through this shit with CoffeeScript like 3 or 4 years ago, and like the open source community is littered with the abandoned superhighway of repos that are no longer maintained because they got written in CoffeeScript as soon as the ECMAScript community picked up all the things that it did. So I'm still very nervous about that. A junior developer, like probably not so much, but like that context and history can inform a lot of technical decisions. And so that's one of the distinctions that I probably make between the two.
Great. Excellent. Okay, everyone, let's open this up to your questions. The AMA in this whole scenario, the Ask Me Anything. There's a chat window. You should be able to access it at the bottom menu to ask any specific questions. So you can get as specific as, what kind of message should I write to a full stack engineer? I've got a really tough client that is super demanding, and I don't know I understand what they're looking for. Can you help me explain this sort of thing? We're just making this an opportunity to ask any questions that you might not be able to ask to a client or a candidate, make it a little bit of a safe space. I know one thing that comes up often, Kyle, with these sort of, when you're laying the groundwork for a new role, is to really get a feel for sort of how to kind of reach out in a way that is effective. Mm-hmm. So, we're talking a little bit about, full stack engineers want to be able to chew into the whole product. They also want to most often work with some new technologies. When you're messaging, you're getting a message, what was the most effective message that you've recently gotten, and what was what was compelling about it? What got your attention?
Trying to think. The stuff that really stands out to me is all devs have some level of skepticism around recruiters. Some, it turns into like a pathological obsession, and others like me, I have a light guard up at all times. That guard comes down, and I'm always willing to talk with people that are interested in participating in the community and doing relationship building. So Alison, when you were a recruiter, you were a visible presence at more than one meetup, and you stayed until the end, and you talked with us and got to know us over time and hung out on the Slack channel and stuff. That goes a long way. On this call right now, Alex Adato. So Alex was an internal recruiter, the same place as me for a while, and he's continued that relationship, and we still have ongoing conversations. And so that kind of stuff goes a long way. I'm trying to think. And then Code Talent in town, hosting meetups, or more recently, Kevin Doran posted some trends that he was seeing in the market, on a blog, and just shared it with developers. And that's not necessarily something that immediately turns into a hire or a placement or anything like that, but it goes a long way towards building trust. And so when I am looking, or when you are offering or something like that, it doesn't have that LinkedIn cold call vibe to it. You sort of have all these people that you're constantly in touch with, and we can refer people to you also. And so when a recruiter hits me up that I have a relationship with, and go, yo, who's good for high level PHP stuff right now? I might be able to put you in touch with somebody who can do that, but not if we've never met before, not if we've never shot the shit or drank a beer or anything like that. So any message that's coming from someone in network from me, those are the ones that I pay attention to.
And what if someone's not so fortunate as to be within the community?
Sure.
Let's say they're reaching out from remotely, and we're going the traditional channels via email. What's kind of a good subject line even to get you to open a message from them? Not that there's one that applies to everything, of course. You know what I mean?
Sure. So, and that's really the key to it. Something that indicates that they did a little bit of research on me. So, at a minimum level, if somebody's offering me C# and .NET and Java and stuff, is you don't know shit about what I do. Or if somebody is trying to woo me with the paradigm of the week kind of stuff, functional programming is mega hot in programming right now. I'm not that into it. So anything generic, that's not gonna pass the smell test. if you hit me with something about education opportunities, like you want to work for an education company, it's like, oh, so you do know something about me. Or like, I saw that you gave a lot of talks on testing in the last year. So like, we're actually looking for somebody with like a strong testing background to help build that into our team. That would catch my attention. Or, hey, I noticed that you ran the Ember meetup for a while. We actually kind of use that here, and we're looking for some help. Maybe that's a contract, maybe that's just an introduction you make, or let's chat. But anything that indicates that they did even a modicum of research, all the talks I've given the last year are on my website. Like, it's not hard to find out what I care about and what I do. But as soon as you start trying to cast a wide net, and I can tell that you're doing that, like, I'm out.
Great. We have a specific question about an open role. This person is, they have a new full stack role, and it's asking for TypeScript. And they're finding a lot of trepidatious impressions, like from candidates, like you have indicated, kind of the technology choice.
Sure.
They're kind of at this point wanting to understand exactly what's the use of TypeScript. I understand the benefit is to correct code errors in real time. Is that accurate? And anything else I should know, should I understand about it, TypeScript specifically?
Accurate. Almost any developer that you talk to, like, is probably familiar with what types are and what they do. And yes, it is like kind of real time catching errors. It catches errors at the design stage rather than the like, hey, why doesn't my thing work and I'm scratching my head stage. The problem is that it's the types that TypeScript is slapped on top of JavaScript. And like that was the big CoffeeScript burn. CoffeeScript added an awful lot of neat things to JavaScript, and then JavaScript incorporated almost all of them, and now CoffeeScript is dead. So like that's where a lot of that hesitation comes from. It's not that it's not cool or that types aren't awesome. It's that, whoa, we all had this one way we talked about something, and now Microsoft is trying to like change that. It's also from Microsoft, which also makes it immediately suspect to a lot of developers. But it's not bad. If I was like trying to think of how I would craft a posting around that or answer questions around TypeScript, I would emphasize maybe that like you're willing to train on it, or like you don't need to know TypeScript already to do this, and also like. I guess this would be another thing that would really like lower my resistance to talking to a recruiter is if you can sort of craft messaging and stuff and have it delivered by a developer that I can sort of probe and argue with a little bit and get how dedicated are you to this idea? And if it turns out that TypeScript is a flop because the whole community ends up going with Flow, which is a competing technology that solves like a similar kind of thing. If community consensus goes towards that, are you willing to hop ship? Are you willing to drop it if it's like causing more trouble than it's worth? Like those are some things that I think would help me feel better about going to a shop that was using TypeScript.
Okay. Well, yeah. So then that's some of the kind of questions they can pose back to the hiring manager.
Yes.
About the commitment to that and what if. It's, yeah. That's a nice sort of full orientation too about the technology that's. Yeah, the history of what happened with CoffeeScript as well.
Yeah. Just one more thing. That's another thing just in general. If you can put me in touch with one of your developers and you're willing to do that and the devs are willing to do that also, that goes a really long way. That tells me you have a fairly transparent culture. Like I don't need you to pretend that you're a developer and like you know the difference between Flow, TypeScript, and CoffeeScript. But if you're willing to put me in touch with somebody who will have that conversation with me, and like also thinks that that's a valuable use of their time, that like makes me think that you actually care about who you're hiring, and that makes me more likely to want to bite.
Great. Yeah, and that's actually kind of full circle. When you do get a question from a candidate that you aren't able to answer, don't try to
I can tell.
cobble together your answer. It's okay. They're totally fine. And hey, that's a great question. Let me get someone to follow up with you, or I can get that answer. And then it also creates an opportunity to reconnect with that candidate. Hey, I got your answer, and would you be open to speaking with Patty. She can tell you more about it.
Love it.
Yes, there's some humility that is appreciated by developers. They're not expecting you to answer the probing questions, but at least, they're also able to ask you those questions in the first place. So, okay, we've got one more quick question here. So we also have a soon-to-be graduate of Galvanize on the call. So this is a soon-to-be full-stack in the wild developer. What are some key things that they can do now to build relationships with the tech community and employers in the city that they plan on relocating to?
Is that from James Truitt?
Maybe.
What up, True?
He's calling you out, James.
How can you get in touch and start developing relationships with recruiters in a city you don't live in? Is that the question?
Yes, recruiters and just the tech community, so kind of both ends of the spectrum.
Sure. So most major cities at this point have something kind of like Denver Devs. So if you're not familiar, Denver Devs is a community Slack team with knocking right on 5,000 people at this point, local developers, and that's the water cooler in Denver. Most cities have those now. Denver's is actually one of the most active in the world, and so not generally quite as good as Denver's. But
it's tonight, right, Kyle?
What was that?
Denver Devs is tonight, right?
Oh, the happy hour is tonight.
Happy hours.
And the happy hour, the Slack team, those kinds of things are the first place I would look for. So hypothetically, I'm moving to Chicago or something. I'd say, cool, do you have a community Slack? And what's your meetup scene like? And it might be that their meetup scene sucks. It might be that their Slack team is dead. There's usually something kind of equivalent though. But finding those kinds of places where all the devs go to drink beer and talk shit. And so that's the first place I'd look for. And the Slack team is nice, or the discourse or any of those kinds of tools, because you can engage with them before you move. We have a ton of people on Denver Devs who are hey, I'm in New York right now, but I'm looking to start a job in Denver and just sort of get to know some people. And then the next step is put the effort in to get to know them. And this is a thing that both devs and sometimes recruiters do a really bad job of. It's it doesn't have to all be business, man. We can talk about the Broncos. We can talk about, I don't know, video games you're into, new albums. Networking is the most pretentious way of saying make friends. But if we've had people who hey, I'm from out of town, but I'm looking to move to Denver, who get in, GIF arguments and stuff with us. And by the time they're actually here, I feel I know a little bit about their personality and their character. I'm a lot more willing to, maybe engage with them or help them out.
Great. Well, that sort of wraps it up, everyone. We're hitting right at 5 minutes to 1. If you are curious to learn more about what recruiting innovation is doing, we have some more resources similar to this. We have full online courses and blogs and things like that. Because you have participated in our webinar, we are doing a promotion for all of our guests. We are offering the professional tier subscription for the basic price, save over almost $250 on the year subscription. So I'll send a follow-up and include that link. And thank you so much for everyone that participated. Thanks for posing your questions. It wouldn't be an AMA without some collaboration from the community. And thank you so much, Kyle Cobra Lee, Fullstack Engineer extraordinaire. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Cool. Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.